and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you. Hello, I'm Tom Dillon and I'm on my own this week. So Helen's away, so I thought I'd get a couple of cheeky little podcasts done while she's away. So you're going to have to listen to me waffling on for the next, could be 10 minutes, could be quarter of an hour, could be 20 minutes, who knows? It probably won't be longer than 20 minutes because the last time I did this, it ended up being 40 and I broke it down into 2 different episodes. So we'll see how we go. But today on the podcast, we're going to be exploring a fascinating aspect of coaching, and that is parts work. Now, it's going to be very much an introduction to parts work. There's a lot to talk about. We don't have time to explore in a very full way today, but I'm going to just give you a bit of a head start and introduce the idea to you. So by the end of this episode, you will have a little bit of an understanding of where the idea of parts work within coaching comes from, how different psychological coaching models approach it, and how you might start to use it in your coaching practice. So a little bit of background. I think the idea that we're made up of different parts has been around for a long time. You know, the ancient Greeks had their humours that saw different elements to us. Freud had his ego, superego, and the id, so 3 different elements of us that made the whole, the psyche. Eric Berne had the parent, adult, child. So again, 3 different parts of us. Steve Peters in more recent years has had the human, the chimp, and the computer. And maybe someone that brought this to the fore, Carl Jung, had the idea of archetypes that we work with, but also had that idea of the human psyche, the inner landscape, and talked about complexes. So he saw these as emotionally charged clusters of feelings, memories and ideas that operate independently of our conscious awareness. So you might have a mother complex, so that might unconsciously shape someone's relationships or expectations. A hero complex might drive someone to constantly prove themselves. And then he had this concept of the shadow, so those parts of ourselves that we don't like, that we reject or we disown, and they might be impulses, fears, even strengths that we haven't fully integrated into our psyche. And then finally, the persona, so the mask that we wear in public, so the version of ourselves that fits with social expectations. So Carl Jung's big idea was around integration. So by recognizing and engaging with these different parts, our complexes, our shadow, and our persona, we can become more whole. So this idea of this inner multiplicity is really the starting point of all modern parts work. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about parts work. So if you think about your own inner landscape, you probably have an idea that there are different parts of you that come out at different times, and they may be conflicting, some may be hidden, just as Jung described, but I think we can all recognize there are different parts to us. And quite often that will come up in coaching where someone will have maybe a dilemma and they'll say, well, there's a part of me that wants to do this, and then there's a part of me that wants to do that. And quite often when you dig a little bit deeper, there are other parts that could come out and play as well, that could be part of the conversation. And I've created my own model called the Inner Forum, which explores that inner world that's not just looking at, okay, you've got this part and this part, let's talk to those 2. Actually, what other parts are there within you that have something to say about the dilemma that you're facing? So moving on from Carl Jung, Virginia Satir and the relational approach. She was a family therapist, and she introduced the idea of much of our inner conflict coming from the roles that we take on relationships, especially in families. So she didn't call them parts, she called them roles, but she had the placator, the blamer, the super reasonable, and the irrelevant. And each of these is a part of us, a role we play to survive emotionally within a family, and obviously then later on within the outer world, the wider world. And how do we actually navigate our environment? And going back to what we were saying earlier about Eric Berne and transactional analysis, his model, a lot of the work he was looking at was how we navigate our environment and survive and stay safe. So here's the critical insight that Virginia Satir had, that every part has a positive intent. So even the part of you that criticizes, procrastinates, self-sabotages, is trying to meet some need that you have. So Satir taught that the awareness, the dialogue, the externalizing of these roles can help people to integrate them into a coherent, authentic self. So Virginia Satir's methods, like family sculpting, made these invisible internal dynamics visible. And this became the foundation of what NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, would later formalize as parts work techniques. So if you have studied NLP, parts work is very much integrated into that. So you might invite the parts that people have. So as I was talking about with having a dilemma, you might invite those two parts to sit on your hands, and you might talk to the two different parts and get a sense of what they want for you as an individual, what their best intention is for you, and try to integrate them together, to come together, to find a way forward that satisfies both parts and the positive intent that both parts have. So that's how it's used within NLP. And obviously it's used to kind of reframe situations, shift behaviors of the parts, but obviously very sort of goal solution focused, which makes it useful in a coaching context. And I just want to mention Gestalt therapy. I mean, it's not recognized too much in terms of parts, but there's definitely an approach there that could bring out the parts. So if you do empty chair work within a Gestalt environment and within a Gestalt approach to coaching, then you would definitely invite that conversation to be had between the different parts of you that have an opinion on something. So Fritz Perls, who's the founder of Gestalt, recognized that there was the top dog. So that's the kind of critical, demanding part of you. And then there's that maybe fearful, resistant, rebellious part that was seen as the underdog. And those two, Perls saw those two as constantly at loggerheads and in conflict. So part of the Gestalt work is to allow the parts to be in dialogue with each other. So it's not just about conflict resolution. In Gestalt, it's very much about awareness and embodiment, and you bring the parts into the room, you give them a voice, you let the coachee experience them fully, and through the dialogue, the integration occurs. So definitely Gestalt will bring the parts to life and bring them into the experience of being in the coaching room. So that's another way that you might work with parts. And finally, I just want to touch upon internal family systems, which is probably the most recognized way that parts work is carried out these days, particularly within a therapy setting. But that side of things, the internal family systems model, is starting to find its way into coaching. And it's the work of Richard Schwartz, who started off, he's a family therapist that started off looking at this idea in the 1980s. And he had three main roles that he defined. So he had the managers. This is, again, internal parts. So you have the managers, so they're protective, controlling, preventing pain. The firefighters, which are very much reactive, seeking to soothe distress, sometimes destructively. And the exiles, the vulnerable parts that carry pain or trauma. So very much he's in that world of family therapy where perhaps addressing childhood trauma. So obviously that's not for the coaching room, but I think some of these ideas, some of these concepts can translate across to the coaching world. And I've certainly seen Richard Schwartz advocating the fact that coaches are working in a different space and can bring some of this work to coaching and reach people that perhaps he wouldn't be reaching because they wouldn't be going for therapy, and certainly not family therapy. So the internal family system model places the self at the center. So the self is the compassionate, wise inner leader who can listen to the different voices, understand them, and try to integrate them, bring them together. So there's an emphasis there on healing and self-leadership, so helping coachees develop a harmonious internal system rather than just resolving conflict. So if we kind of just put it all together and summarize kind of the evolution of parts work, and they're not necessarily all connected, so I'm not sure that Richard Schwartz was necessarily referring back to Jung. I'm not sure that he, I don't know, he might have referred to Satir, but I've not heard him talk about that. But we've got Jung in the first place looking at those. And you could say Freud as well, because he had the idea of the superego and the ego, so there are definitely different parts there. And then you've got people like Eric Berne looking at the parent, adult, child. And then you have Virginia Satir, who brought that relational and role-based awareness to different parts. And obviously Gestalt, Fritz Perls teaching about the underdog and the top dog. And say it's used quite widely within NLP as sort of a practical way to resolve inner conflict and try to integrate the different parts. And finally, say internal family systems is definitely something that is coming more into the coaching world, so something that's worth exploring. So what we'll probably do now is widen this out to a more expansive podcast around internal family systems to give that a proper airing. But I just wanted to introduce the concept of parts and doing parts work. As I say, I have my own model that I work with called the Inner Forum, where I invite lots of different parts, and they're not necessarily labeled as shadow parts or firefighters, but just inviting the parts out to have a conversation. So it's definitely an area that I work with within my coaching, and it can be really powerful and quite revelatory for the coachees that I'm working with. So just a quick fire introduction to parts work within coaching. Hope you've enjoyed that. Next time on the podcast, it's another quick dip in from me to a different element of coaching, and I'm going to be looking at the reticular activating system and how it's often misrepresented. You know, I love to dispel some neuromyths. I'm going to be looking at that and hopefully giving you an insight into why you shouldn't be talking about the reticular activating system within coaching, unless you're doing it in the correct way. So we'll talk about that next time. So I hope you've enjoyed that. If you are enjoying the podcast, do subscribe so you never miss an episode. Do recommend it to your fellow coaching doctors who might not have come across us in the past, and give us a 5-star rating, whatever your platform is. And we look forward to, I look forward to talking to you again in a few weeks. And I look forward to talking to you again next week. Again, I'll be without Helen, so we'll see how that one goes. But she'll be back the following week, so you'll be on safe ground after that. So thank you, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.